it's Lee from ColoringQueen.net, and today I just want to give you a quick summary of all the blending products that I've tried and experimented with 25 sets of pencils on 4 different types of paper, and let you know which one was my favourite. So out of the blenders, we've got Derwent blenders and burnishers, Caran blenders, Derwent alcohol blenders, Tombow markers, Prismacolor and Lyra blenders, paper Stump, and we've also got some liquid blenders like Meltz from Holbein, Zest It, and Gamsol. So I tested these with 25 sets of pencils. I'll put up the names here. And I tested them on 4 different types of paper. Now if you want to see the full review of me going through and testing them all out, the link below will take you to that review. It is very long, so it has been time-stamped so that you can go to the blender of your choice without having to go through the whole video looking for it. And at the end is my summary of my top 5 favourite products. So on the Create Space paper or print on demand paper, KDP paper, whatever you want to call it, the paper that's in a lot of independent published colouring books, I took out a page from one of those colouring books and I tested out all of those 12 products on it. And what I found was going through this, and I'll just show it up to you zooming in, that the Prismacolor Blender worked really well on most of the pencils on this KDP paper, and it was great for removing the bits of tooth. But the Colour Soft pencils that I tested it with and the Colleen pencils, it did leave a little bit of pigment dust, but it did really smooth it down, and that's the blender there. The next one I tested on the KDP paper was the Lyra blender, and that's a quite hard blender in comparison with the Prismacolor. And I'll put these swatches up on my blog so that you can look at them in detail. And what I found was the Lyra blender pencil. It was quite hard in comparison and quite long lasting. You can see that it did cover all of these little swatches, and it blended the WH Smith pencils that I have and the Faber-Castell Classics far easier than what the Prismacolor did. So that was quite a good result for the Lyra, and it has a really hard lasting point on it. Now the Derwent blender went really well with most of the coloured pencils on there, and there were a few coloured pencils that I had a lot of trouble with, like Jane Davenport and WH Smith and Faber-Castell Classics, and most of those are kind of budget brand pencils, so it's probably got to do with something in the pigment. But although when you look at it, although it blended really well and there's not a lot of white toothy spots, the Jane Davenport didn't really blend that well. And you can see with some blenders, you actually get more vibrancy than with others. Now the Derwent markers that I used, which are special blender pens that Derwent make, they were fantastic to use, and it's just so easy. It makes you wonder, you know, why you would use anything else, except they use up a lot of alcohol, and over big areas they're probably not that good, but on this KDP paper they were extremely good. Now I've missed the Derwent Burnisher, and that's basically a blender that puts a little gloss on things, and to be honest I really didn't notice any difference on my swatches. But the Derwent marker is absolutely fantastic. And then the other one I tried was the Caran pencil. Now this is the Caran blender, but it is now in a pencil form. So it's the same product but now with a barrel, and I've got to say that worked extremely well on all of the swatches that I tried. And so then I tried the stick, and the stick is the same product as the pencil, worked extremely well on all of the pencils that I tried, and much longer lasting on the tip. And it worked extremely well with my Prismacolors, my Holbeins, my Pablos, my Colleens, and probably the best I've tried for the Erogeton and the Ergosoft, but it did need a little bit more time, and the Lyra product actually seemed to work a little bit better. But as far as the polys go, it wasn't that good of an experience. It certainly blended them, but I think other products were better for that. The only issue I have with the pencil is that it does tend to get blunt pretty easily, and the Magic Stick, the other Caran product, seems to hold its blender more, but every time you sharpen it or get a point on it, you do lose your product because there's no casing. Throughout this experiment, I had a lot of problems blending the Jane Davenport product, and even with the wonderful Caran blenders, it still was a little bit problematic with the Jane Davenport pencils. But as far as everything else, it worked out really well on the KDP paper. Now, the Tombow blender, I've been using these for years, and Tombow recommends that you use them with their actual pencil products. And I've been using them with my Tombow Erogetons, my recycled pencils, and my Prismacolors for about 3 or 4 years. And they work really well with wax-based pencils. But what I found doing this experiment was the Derwent Marker actually works better. Now, I still tend to use the Tombow marker with wax-based pencils like my Prismacolors and those Tombow pencils I mentioned, but a lot of the blend, like you can see here, it's a bit blotchy and it didn't really work as well as, say, the Derwent marker. Now, these markers are extremely useful if you have a hand injury or a wrist injury or you've got arthritis, because it requires very little effort to blend and you're not using up those joints or muscles that might cause you pain or discomfort. One of the problems, though, with using a marker or any sort of wet solution to blend is that you could actually be disturbing other pencil that you don't want to blend, so you might not get the fine detail that you might with a pencil. But if you're not worried about that, then it's certainly worth considering. The other issue I had with the Tombow blender was on the polychromos. On this thin paper, it actually tended to damage the paper or peel the paper as I was using it. And the Derwent marker actually seemed a lot better and easier to clean than on this one. But it is, as I say, it's good on wax-based pencils, and I'll continue to use it with my Prismacolors and my Tombows. So the other product I tried was Gamsol. This is a mineral spirit that's used quite often in the art world. Make sure you always read the directions on it. And it has a really strong odour, so if you have sensitivities to smells, etc., like I do, then you might not want to use this. It does work extremely well. It kind of dissolves all of the pigment, and I found it was really good with the Progresso pencils that with others it didn't seem to be that good. But the issue I had with the Gamsol and the Progresso pencils was it actually took out the pigment. It kind of muted it, and you can see that the pigment is far better and more vibrant with the Derwent marker rather than with the Gamsol. And you can see that they're all a little bit muted except for like the Prismacolors. It worked very well with the Jane Davenport pencils, which I had a real problem finding a good blending product for. But it didn't work that well with the Crayolas. I actually think the pencil products worked far better with the polychromos than the Gamsol, because you can see, or even the Derwent marker, you can see the vibrancy up there on that one. So next one I tried was Zest It, which is another pencil blend solution. This one's got a lovely scent to it. It's citrus, and it's far more pleasant than the Gamsol, which has got that really strong odour. Now the Zest It worked really well on most products, and I find the smell of it much better. But you can see that it actually mutes the colours, so the Tombow marker with the colleens was a far more vibrant result than the Zest It. But I mean, it really depends on, you know, how much work you want to do. It worked extremely well with the WH Smith pencils and the Faber-Castell Classics, but on some of the pencils like the Felissimos, it's kind of removing the pigment. Now you can of course go over after you've blended and put another layer of colour on, but you know, sometimes you might not want to do that and you might not want to do the extra work. Now the next product I tested on the KDP paper was the Holbein Meltz product, and I've used this previously with the Holbein pencils. It's meant to produce a watercolour type effect. I don't know what's wrong with it today, but on most of the pencils that I tried, I was really going to just give it up and throw it away. It did work with the Holbein pencils, but to be honest, other things worked better. And personally, it's hard to find, it's difficult to get, and after my experience with it, I really wouldn't use it again or recommend it, because it, as well as dissolving the pigment, it basically moved the pigment all over, and on some of the papers that I used, it actually dissolved all the printer ink as well, whereas other wet products I used didn't do that. Now the biggest surprise to me on the KDP paper was the paper stump that you just get from the discount store. You can use these with wet media. I just use them dry to blend out, and I was really surprised by how vibrant the stump is up against Blender solution or any type of Blender solution. And for a very cheap product, to me it seemed like it produced a comparable good result compared to the other expensive products that I'd used. So I was really quite surprised by that. So I also tested all of those products on the Canson My Tense paper, and I chose this paper because when I did my paper review, it seemed to be a paper that was universally pretty good. So what I found was, using the paper that's got a bit more tooth in it, most of the blending products worked really well. The Prismacolor Blender particularly well. It removed the tooth from most of the pencil products. Not so good on the Spectrum Noir. Not so good on the WH Smith, but to be honest, not a lot worked that well with WH Smith pencils. But most of the pencils, it worked really well with the Prismacolor Blender on the Canson My Tense. Now the Lyra blender also worked pretty well with most of the coloured pencils that I used. The Muji's still got a little bit more tooth there, but overall it was pretty good. The Jane Davenport pencils, they're really hard to find a good solution for me that worked really well with them, but on the whole most of them worked really well. Now you can see that some blending solutions didn't work that well with the Canson My Tense, so which is the Gamsol. A lot of the colours were more muted, so you can see that polychromos are far more muted up against, say, the Tombow marker or the Derwent marker. So anything other than Gamsol or Zest It or Meltz with the polychromos would work much better. I think it's probably because of the binder and the filler that's in the polychromos and the oil content of those pencils, that those sorts of alcohol type based solutions or those mineral spirits like Gamsol and Zest It and the Meltz, whatever is in that, it just doesn't seem to react very well. But just like most pencils work well with the Canson My Tense paper, so do most blending solutions, except for, you know, the Gamsol and the Zest It on those polychromos. But I was really surprised how well the paper stump worked, and what sort of vibrancy that I got from that. Now, the Marco Refines didn't work that well with the Tombow markers, and you can see the Spectrum Noir didn't work that well with the Tombow marker either. But I think the biggest disappointment was the Faber-Castell polychromos that didn't really work that well with a lot of those products I tried. And look, it could just be me. Now, over on the other side, there's still a bit of tooth showing here, but what you'll notice the most is that the Gamsol and the Zest It and the Meltz, they actually really muted the colours of the W.H. Smith pencils and really took away the pigment, which was quite disappointing. And on the Felissimo pencils, they really didn't take away as much of the tooth as you would like for using that sort of product. And same with the Progresso pencils. So with the Canson My Tense and of course those pesky Jane Davenports, on the My Tense paper, which is far more textured than the KDP paper, those products didn't work as well. So it's always good to have maybe one or two blending solutions for the type of paper that you want to use. Now, I tested as well in a Japanese colouring book, and this book is, the paper is such a dream that I really didn't need to use a blender on most of the pictures because the pencils just blended really easily, and that's a reflection of the paper. So on this book I didn't really have any trouble with most of the blenders that I've used, and it really was just a dream. I mean, everything seemed to work pretty well on it. I'd say that out of all of them, the Lyra blender and the Prismacolor probably worked the best, but really they all worked pretty well, and that was on a Japanese book. In Joanna Basford's Secret Garden, I tested out the blenders as well, and I found that a lot just took away pigment, or they didn't really improve it that much. I found the Colleen pencils worked extremely well in this book, especially with the Caran blender or the Prismacolor blender, or even the one that surprised me was actually the paper Stump, and that results that I didn't like so much if you went over it with the paper Stump, even after you'd already blended it, that you could actually smooth out some lines. Now, the Holbein Meltz is this product here on the Holbein pencils, and to be honest, it didn't really produce the result that it's produced for me previously, so I don't know if it was a bad day or not, but it just wasn't as good as I would have expected it. But I tested all of those out. You can see that on my blog as well. The Lyra pencils and blender don't seem to really like the paper in the UK edition of this book, and it wasn't that pleasant to colour that picture in. But out of going through all of those blending solutions, you know, I picked out a few favourites of mine that I think would carry you through most blending solutions that you might need. So my favourites are the new Caran pencil, even though it is more expensive than the... even though you probably get more product out of the Magic Stick, it just feels far more comfortable to use the barreled pencil. Now, this might not be available everywhere because of current shipping problems throughout the world, but keep an eye out for it. It is a dream to work with. My other favourite, of course, is still the Caran stick blender. I really love the Derwent alcohol markers and the Tombow blender, as well as Zest It. I find that's a really nice solution, and I do like the fragrance on it. I would never buy Gamsol again because the smell is just horrid. And I think these little paper stumps are really good value, and I was surprised at how well that they blended things, even when they've already been blended before unsuccessfully, and very cheap. So my favourite 5 are those ones there. I hope this has been of some use to you. You can see those swatches in more detail on my blog. So that's it from me. Until next time, stay safe and happy colouring.